Good afternoon and welcome to the October update for my California native plant garden in the central Sierra Nevada foothills. Today I want to do a little bit of a review of how this garden kind of came to be, some of the planning that went into setting it up, because that's going to be sort of computer screen capture stuff, but I'm going to try to capture some information that I'll then edit into a digital tour, if you will. So this area was originally a Bermuda grass lawn down here in this area, which actually had a sprinkler system that watered it. And so we took that out. This hill over here was, I don't know if these railroad ties that are here, if they were originally intended to be a garden or if it's just sort of bank stabilization. But that's kind of another zone which gets a lot of light and has decent soil in that general vicinity. And then over here, as you approach the side of the house, I think there's sort of soil that was put in as fill at one point, probably when the home was constructed, so it's not as good. This sort of stream area, of course, as I've discussed before, was it's kind of the natural area where the water runs off of the roof and then down the hill in front of the house and then out toward a seasonal creek that runs through the backyard and then goes down to a lake at the center of this neighborhood. So there's a drain that we had installed last year when we had this concrete poured for the patio. Excuse the patio. It is a bit of a mess, including that bag, which is currently vomiting up Bermuda grass, which I've been pulling every week out here. Now the garden itself is enclosed with a fence, with a deer fence, and that does prevent a lot of browsing, but not all of the browsing that can jump it. And there are spots on the sides here where it's open, that I haven't put in a gate or anything, so the deer can come in. It's not intended to completely eliminate browsing. It's just intended to make it a little bit harder so that the plants have a slightly better chance than they would if they were just fully exposed. The deer will pick the things that are easiest to get to, and so making this a little bit harder for them to get to gives them a little bit better of a chance. Okay, so this setup is going to be a little hit or miss. I'm recording on my phone for voice. Apologies for any background noise that might happen. Okay, so what I did here essentially was I started by taking an aerial of my house, and then I used Microsoft PowerPoint, mainly because I am not clever enough to use a more sophisticated tool, but I do know PowerPoint really, really well. So I'm not saying that you should use PowerPoint to plan out your garden necessarily, but that, use the tool that you're the most comfortable with. For me, I'm pretty good in PowerPoint. So I took an aerial of my yard, and then I blocked out the features that I felt were important for the garden. So here's this little area here with stone, and then I blocked out the fence that we were going to put in, and the patio, and then this little blue streak here is sort of standing in for the sort of dry creek bed, which it follows the path of the drain pipe that we had installed, except for this piece that goes from the downspout. So those are the fixed points that I had to work from. 1 foot is equal to 0.12 inches. the way I got that was I measured the distances in Google Maps. In Google Maps, you can right click on the aerial map and select measure distance and then click another point and it will tell you how far that is. So if you measure that on Google Maps and then you measure that in PowerPoint, if I were to draw a line from here to here in PowerPoint, then I would get a distance. And then if I divide those two numbers together, then I'll get the ratio. So if I put a shape in here that's 0.12 inches and put it on this map, I know that that's going to be roughly 1 foot in the real world. So where that comes into play is on this spreadsheet. So this is Microsoft Excel, of course, and on this spreadsheet, I have each plant, and then I have its height and width. And I got these primarily from CalScape. So if you go to CalScape and search for a plant, I find it's actually easier just to search, like if I were looking for, say, Salvia Gracias, I just type Salvia Gracias CalScape into Google, or it looks like I'm actually using Bing, so please don't judge me. And then that takes you straight there. I think that search, like a search engine from Google or apparently Bing works great too, will get you to CalScape and to the entry faster than using the native search inside of CalScape. I don't know why that is, but sometimes when you type an item in there to search, it's harder to find. So once you go to CalScape then, so here's Salvia Gracias. This isn't a very exciting entry. Some of them have more interesting entries than that. Like let's look at Toyon. So here's Toyon heteromeles arbudifolia. And the CalScape entries are really fun because they show, I know this wasn't supposed to be a CalScape tutorial, but photos that people have taken of that plant. It shows you the distribution, and then some information about the plant, and then some sort of additional information that you might find helpful down here, including size. So 6 to 30 feet tall. What I did was I just averaged those two numbers if there was a range. So I would have taken, like, since this one's 10 to 15 feet wide, I would have used 12.5 feet. This is the important measurement, the width, although height is also important, of course, from a design perspective. And so then once I have those numbers, I put those into my spreadsheet. And then this column, it says inches, is really showing if I'm converting this into a diameter that I can use on my diagram, I suppose you would call it, in PowerPoint. What is that width? That would be equivalent to 3.5 feet, and it's 0.42 inches, and that's based on this scale. So this thing is using a formula, so it's taking D4, which is the 3.5, and multiplying it by F2, which is 0.12. For all of these. So that gives me all the information I need to put these plants onto this diagram. What I did first was I created little circles for each plant, and I lined them all up somewhere on this document, and then I just started placing them to see what would work the best. So these are the plants then that I bought in December. I bought a Monica Manzanita. If I go into shape format, so that's 1.2 inches, and that corresponds to, let's find Monica Manzanita, 1.2 inches, corresponds to 10 feet in width. So I've got a good visual representation then of the space that this plant is going to take up when it's fully grown. So you'll see in the garden, you might say, oh, there's a lot of empty space out there right now, but when these plants are fully grown, they need all that space for them. I placed the biggest plants first, the sort of marquee plants. The Manzanita, when this is fully grown, if it ever gets this big, will be so amazing. And then here are the big stages that went up at the top. There's the Starlight Sage, another Starlight Sage, which we'll get to later about how that turned out. Pozo Blue Sage, Winifred Gilman. This is a silver bush lupin. Here's the Penstemon pseudospectabilis. There's the other pseudospectabilis, the dwarf white sage, deergrass, celestial blue sage, another deergrass there, and a bladder pod. And then down here, the elderberry and 3 hummingbird sages, 2 California field sedges, the Artemisia tridentata, and the 3 California buckwheats. Big Toyon over here and the big Buckeye. That was the original plan. This is not what we actually planted because we decided to move these 3 out of this garden, and these ones went over into that other area. The rue, I think, is actually native to Europe. The lipstick sage is Texas, native to Texas and Mexico. And the beech wormwood, this one is a native, actually. This one is from coastal California. But so we put that one over there because it kind of has more of an herbal feel to it. So those ones didn't end up going here. So this is what was actually planted. So here's, all right, so up here, I kind of started with the big sages, the sort of marquee sages, and put those in some strategic locations and then kind of filled in around them. Originally, I had 2 starlights side by side. Starlights are these big, beautiful sage. I believe it's a hybrid of white sage and Cleveland sage, and they'll get really big. This one's probably only about 3 feet tall. I have one at the top of the hill that got maybe 5 feet tall and just huge around. Before it kind of started to struggle. I think because of its size, it got too big for it to get enough water. And then directly behind it, I didn't mean to put it directly behind it. I think I intended to put it kind of to the side a little bit, and then when planting, just, I don't know, things, it didn't go quite the way that it was supposed to. But right behind it is a Pozo blue sage, which is still blooming. Shocking that these guys continue to bloom. There is a black-eyed Susan down there, kind of growing in the middle of it. That came out of an annual seed packet. We spread a lot of annual seed in this area this year. But Pozo blue, that's one of those marquee hybrid Cleveland sages, similar to the celestial blue in some ways, but this is the first Pozo blue I've planted, and the foliage is awesome. It reminds me a lot of the starlight foliage. They're almost indistinguishable until you see the flowers side by side. So really robust, vigorous foliage, and these just proliferation of blue blossoms. It actually looks a lot like the Allen Chickering sage, and I also have some of those. And this is the celestial blue sage, which is famous, in my opinion, for its blossoms, especially early in the season when they first bloom. You can tell just by the size of this seed head, these blossoms are epic on this thing, especially when they first pop. But you can see that they continue to bloom into the late season. There's still blooms on this thing. It is a Cleveland sage variety. They can get huge. This one's pretty small still, but we're getting some good woody growth at the bottom, and I have high hopes for this one. I planted one in 2021, but I planted it in the shade of a gray pine, and that was a mistake because it just didn't get enough sun there. But I love these because they are one of the most fragrant and really beautifully fragrant. It's almost, the foliage has almost a floral smell. just like the sweetest smelling sage you can possibly imagine. Not the most showy when it comes to the foliage. Very gray in tone compared to the green of the other Cleveland varieties, but it's really all about the flowers with those guys. This is Penstemon pseudospectabilis, which was really leggy early in the season. You can see here the remnants of that. When we first got it, it just sent out a lot of flower stalks. They were really beautiful red flowers, and really more pink than red. Hummingbirds went crazy for them, and they're just awesome. But I was kind of worried because it didn't get a lot of structure, and then late in the season, really late in the season, it really started to fill out. So there's just a lot of really beautiful, vibrant green foliage here. All right, and then over here, this is another Penstemon pseudospectabilis. This one kind of looks more like they did early in the season, and I'm noticing now that there has been some grazing on the tips of this one. There are 3 California buckwheats, and California buckwheat grows like crazy along the sides of the road all up the highway, and they have these really beautiful white flowers in these, just a proliferation of them in the midsummer, and then in late summer they turn this rust color. And so then there's just this carpet of rust-colored blossoms all up along the highway. I thought, hey, maybe if I could get that to really like it here, then there could potentially be a future where I could just blanket this entire hill with buckwheat, Eriogonum fasciculatum, because that's what the hillsides look like along the highway. So planting it here made me come to understand why I see it in the places that I see it along the highway. It's there because the deer don't go there. It doesn't survive because the deer don't eat it. It survives because it's along the highway, and the deer are not along the highway browsing. But they are here browsing, so all of the flowers, as they emerged at the top of this cage, they were all eaten off. The deer don't seem to like the foliage that much, but they do like the flowers, which gives me a little bit of hope that maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll take the cages off and we'll just have some lovely green foliage. We'll see. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do about these next year. I don't know what happened to this one. It's been doing this all year. I don't know. It's not as happy as the other two. This is a California Buckeye, and I am not sure. They do go dormant in the summer. They get really huge. This is almost a tree-sized shrub. So if I can get it tall enough, then it might have a chance. I'm not sure if the deer would eat it or not. It was enclosed for the entire time I had it in here because I just wanted it to get some height. But it went brown like this really early in the season. I want to say August, maybe, and maybe even July, which makes me wonder if it died. I don't know if it did. We'll see if it comes back next year. They are summer deciduous, so they will drop their leaves and then they'll come back in the midwinter. So we'll see if this one comes back in the midwinter. Over here, this is a Toyon. This is a plant that's really common in California gardens. It's like one of the natives that actually does perform really well and that sort of horticulturally nurseries and landscapers do use. I need it to get really big so that the deer won't eat it. I don't know if the deer would eat it, honestly. I didn't want to risk it though, because if it can get enough height, then they won't be able to. And so I kind of don't want to test the waters to see if it would be eaten. So that's about how tall that guy is right now. Not very tall. did put on a lot of foliage late in the season. It was pretty much doing nothing for quite a long time. This is Artemisia tridentata. This is a higher elevation sagebrush that we have. Also, this one is really common in the Lake Tahoe area. When I went up there, there were just whole fields of this in that vicinity, and the deer don't eat this, which is excellent. Although I am seeing some signs of grazing potentially here. That's the issue with these super deer resistant plants. Just because they don't like it doesn't mean they won't try it sometimes, and sometimes they do. Looked a lot better earlier in the season. I have not been watering recently, and we did just have like a surprising hot spell, and so this one might be suffering a little bit from that heat right now. So I'll get some water on these plants tonight, and we'll see if they perk back up tomorrow. But yeah, so that's Artemisia tridentata. I do love it. I love the gray leaves. It's a beauty, and doesn't have flowers. It's not showy, but it's pretty cool. So over here, these are two California field sedges. When I went to the nursery back in December, they didn't actually have a lot of deer grass. So I bought some of these field sedges because they were out of deer grass. And I really shouldn't have. I should have just not, because these are creeping. They have these really thick underground woody rhizomes, and I don't want them to become a Bermuda grass level problem. So I'm probably going to pull them out next year, unfortunately. I do kind of like the little tuft of grass, though. It's just, I think I would prefer something that doesn't have the potential to become a problem. So this is my favorite, I think. It's a contest between the Snowberry and this guy. This is a blue elderberry, and it is the most successful shrub I planted this year. This is the single wettest spot in the entire garden, and elderberry is a riparian plant. It tends to grow along streams, so it does want a lot of moisture. And there's a strange thing that happens under the ground here, where there's the old drain pipe is running right underneath it, and that drain pipe is not connected because it's, it got clogged with dirt over the course of the past 30 years, and so it doesn't really function to drain water. So we put in a new drainage system, but it does still collect some water, and it kind of has a hole in it right at the base of this elderberry. So the elderberry is sort of the beneficiary of a retired old drainage system, and it's doing really, really well. It really struggled early in the season because it got eaten. And then I went a little overboard and I fenced in the entire area where the elderberry is. This fence piece actually connects here, and so nobody can get in here. And it just needs to get the height. It needs to get, this thing will get, I've seen one, there's one by the San Joaquin River that is, I am going to say 30 feet high, maybe 40. It's really tall. It's so they can get really, really big. It's a funny spot for a shrub that's that big, but the theory was that if it got really big, it might actually shade the patio right in this general area from the afternoon sun, which would be awesome. But it will block the view of the garden when you're standing in the garden. When you're standing over on the patio or approaching the garden from that direction, you would still be able to see around it. So that's my elderberry. I love that guy. So over here we have the hummingbird sages, which were in an earlier video just completely choked out by Bermuda grass. I've come in here and liberated those, and they look so much better now. They're happy not only because they were freed from the Bermuda grass, but also because it's been cooler, and they do like it a little bit cooler. They prefer being in a little bit of a shady area, and it's a sage that you can plant in the shade, which is excellent in this area because we don't have a lot of plants that are both drought adapted and shade adapted, and also deer resistant. So the hummingbird sage is an absolute lifesaver in that regard, and it spreads by these runners. This one, when we put it in, I think this was actually the plant that we planted, and then there was a little runner that came over here, and that has since kind of expanded into multiple little areas. There are some little white bugs in here. I don't know what those are. That's disturbing. And this guy decided to bloom pretty late in the season. They typically bloom earlier in the spring area. Hummingbirds and butterflies and all that stuff, all the native insects, and the hummingbirds really love these guys. They are fragrant, and they've got a sweeter sage smell, I would say, than other sages. This one here that you can see, we haven't completely defeated the Bermuda grass. So there's some stuff going on. I wonder what these little white bugs are. I feel like I need to find out. Little white bugs on my sages. What are you? I don't know. And then right away in January, or I can't remember if it was January or February, I went back to the nursery and bought more stuff. That first time that I went to the nursery, they were actually out of a lot of plants. They didn't have any deer grass, or they had very few deer grass. I think they had a couple. Yeah, I planted this one and this one. And if you remember from the garden, those are the two that are more stunted compared to all the other deer grasses. What I learned this year with deer grass is that if you buy little 4-inch plugs, because when I went back, I decided to go ahead and buy the 4-inch plugs. And so all the deer grass that I added in January or February came from those 4-inch plugs. Those ones actually did much better than the 1-gallon deer grass. So yeah, those 4-inch plugs, that's the way to go for deer grass. They will catch up and then surpass the 1-gallon plants really quickly. Okay, so I purchased a black sage, which went up here by where the faucet is, or the spigot rather. I purchased several deer grass, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 deer grass. The Dara's Choice, we purchased the Dara's Choice sages at that time. We purchased the Gracias, the 4 Gracias sages. The Ceanothus Skylark, which is apparently a variety of Ceanothus thyrifloris. And the Allen Chickering sage went down here. A Winifred Gilman sage went over here. The Hummingbird sages, I bought 3 more of those and planted those here. I had completely forgotten actually that those Hummingbird sages were planted at different times. And then I bought our kind of high elevation plants, the Snowberry, the Radiant Manzanita, the Coffeeberry. Also bought the Twin Peaks Coyote brush at that point. And then 2 plants, which I had almost completely forgotten that I had ever purchased. Eriogonum Catherine. This is St. Catherine's lace. It's a particular variety of buckwheat. And also a spice bush, which went over here. So those were the plants that I bought in January and February. Then over here we have my Snowberry. This is a high Sierra plant, which grows. I know I've seen them most commonly. or rather where I've seen the largest concentration of them is up at Lake Tahoe. And so I wasn't expecting it to do very well here, but I planted it in a spot that was pretty shady. I have completely protected it with this, what do you call it? Hardware cloth cage. And once I really enclosed it, it started to do a lot better. The deer do eat the tops of it. It's kind of ridiculous to have this completely enclosed, but it is a plant that I love. And so I'm kind of making that sacrifice that there's this big hardware cloth cage. So this part of the garden, which is in part shade, was a little bit harder for me to plan. I also didn't have unlimited funds to keep buying plants, and I didn't have unlimited time to keep planting. So it kind of got the short end of the stick this year. And for the most part, I kind of went to the nursery and saw what they had and kind of tested a few things. Didn't have as much of a plan for this area. The top of the hill is where we did a lot of the planting. So a lot of these plants are unproven. This is a creeping manzanita. It's called radiant manzanita, and it does get eaten. This one was a gamble from the start, and it's a gamble that is not going to pay off. There's really no way to cage this because it's very low growing. I thought, hey, maybe if the deer don't eat it, it could create like a cool ground cover here, but they do. And for part of the season, I had a cage around it and then just realized that was ridiculous. It was never gonna not be eaten. So I took that cage off, and next year we'll probably replace it with something else, I would think, because it's really not gonna do well here. So back there, that's a Coffeeberry. This is another high elevation plant. It does look like somebody got in here. Did they like break this thing open and then dip their head in and have a snack? Possibly. That's quite a lot of work. I wasn't expecting them to go to those lengths, but apparently they did, because there's been a nibble on that one stalk there, unfortunately. This guy was eaten pretty vigorously early in the season until I put this cover on top of the cage, and then that helped. But apparently I need to really bolt this down so that they can't pick the lock, I guess. Okay, so that's Coffeeberry. This one was another gamble that we put in here, but it's probably not going to work out in this area because it really is just too low growing. I'm not sure how tall it can get, and if it can get tall enough to where the deer won't eat it. We will find out. This is a deer grass. Deer grass is a really reliable plant that provides a lot of provides contrast, right? So if you have a garden that's all sages and eriogonums and manzanitas, the deer grass gives you this pop of color and just like a different sort of feel, so that it's not all homogeneous. And so I do like to use deer grass as sort of a staple. Oh, and then over here, of course, we've got two deer grasses. This is the deer grass that has done the best. This was a bit of a roll of the dice. This is a Ceanothus Skylark, I think. And Ceanothus are native to this area, and they are natural food for the deer. This one, so they need to get big enough to where the deer won't eat the whole plant. And they do get woody, and they have like a natural defense mechanism, especially the leucodermis, which I think is called white thorn, sort of common parlance. because it'll get kind of woody, thorn-like structures. I don't see that on this one. But yeah, the deer did get to this one, but not before it put on some size and structure. So I have hope for this one. And then kind of following along from the penstemon, the original idea was to just have ground cover sages, sort of waterfalling down the front of this hill. But this one looks really good. It's about 5 feet around, and they're just awesome. The Salvia Gracias sage. There's another one. Okay, so in addition, so then outside of the garden, I did plant a few things here. The deer grass, the deer don't touch. I think that might be why they're called deer grass. And this is an Allen Chickering sage. And of course the Cleveland sage varieties, the deer do not eat at all. They will rub their antlers on them when it's that season, but they won't eat them. Slide number 4. These are the early casualties. Okay, so these are the ones that died first. So the lupin, the silver bush lupin, didn't make it. They never do. I've purchased silver bush lupin every year and attempted to get them established, but they just don't make it. The bladder pod didn't make it. I'm not quite sure what happened to that one. I don't know if it was overwatered, underwatered, if it just didn't like it here. I don't know what it was, but that one died really early on. And the St. Catherine's lace was, I believe it was eaten by deer, like to the ground several times, and it just didn't make it. So those ones all died pretty early on. And then my sister bought a California fuchsia for me on a whim, and so I planted that California fuchsia where the St. Catherine's lace had died. If you remember, this fuchsia is a shocking survivor. Even though it gets eaten constantly, it's still out there. Over here, this is a California fuchsia of some kind, which is a total mistake. So this was kind of an experiment. We'll see if the deer eat it kind of thing, and surprise, they do. They really, really do. So every time it leaves out, they eat it, and then it leaves back out, and they eat it again. And I'm just so shocked that there's still green shoots coming out of this thing, because it has been really badly abused this year. Oh, right. So right here, every year I try to plant a silver bush lupin, and I've never managed to get one to take. But there was a little baby silver bush lupin that I tried to plant here early in the season, and it didn't make it. They are native, so the silver bush lupins are really beautiful in this area. And maybe I'll have some pictures of them that I can cut into this to show you what they'll look like if they're fully grown. They're really beautiful in the spring, and then they kind of die back in the summer. But man, the show that they put on the spring is unparalleled, and it's 100% like hyper native, like super localized to this area. I don't think you see silver bush lupin very far outside of this, narrow band of the Sierra foothills. Then we had more casualties in March and May. We lost the black sage and the starlight and the Winifred Gilman, but those 3 died from overwatering. There was a problem with the irrigation in this area, and they didn't make it. We also lost this Winifred Gilman over here. That one, I don't know what happened to that one. I think that one might have been overwatered as well. And the spice bush didn't make it. And I think the spice bush didn't make it primarily because the soil here is really bad, and it just really, really didn't like it in that spot. I also put a bunch of question marks here by the Buckeye, because I do not know if the Buckeye is dead or alive, and I don't think I'll know until next year. So then we had a late June planting, And that involved a few new plants. I put a new Winifred Gilman in up here where the starlight had died. And I put an Eleanor Monkeyflower here where the Winifred Gilman, the previous Winifred Gilman, had died. And then I put a Penstemon GMR White right here. I replaced this Winifred Gilman sage with a Brandigee sage. And I replaced the spice bush with the Ceanothus Ray Hartman. I also forgot to mention the woolly sunflower that was also in the June planting on the previous slide. This right here is a Winifred Gilman, which we put in where the starlight died. So early on in the season, this irrigation system, it wasn't connected as securely or watertight as it is now, so it sprayed a lot of water, and that water killed both a black sage, which was right there where that nozzle is, where that emitter is, and it also killed this starlight, which I did come back and replace this starlight with a Winifred Gilman in June. This right here is a Eleanor Monkeyflower, I think it is. And this one also went in where something else died. I can't remember what that something else is right now. But I'll know because it will still be on the diagram. This is a place where something else didn't make it. I think it was originally a bladder pod. And we placed it with this Penstemon GMR White, which bloomed really late into the season, and I'm really excited to see what that one does next year. And the deer didn't seem to like it, which is great. This is a woolly sunflower, which is, I think, being eaten on the regular. This fuzzy stuff is fascinating. It's so fuzzy. But yeah, we'll see what this one does next year. It got planted in June, which is really, really late for a plant to go in. And so hopefully we'll get a good show from it next year. It does look like it's strengthened in terms of sort of the size and density of this mat at the bottom. So hopefully we'll get some height on it next year, but it's possible that the only reason these stalks are still here is because they were woody before I planted it here. And so it's possible that the deer are eating all the fresh stalks before they can grow, which might imply that maybe this one would benefit from being caged for a season just so that it can develop some structure. And maybe then that structure will be woody enough that the deer won't like it. This over here was a late addition. I don't think we had anything here when I first diagrammed this area. And at one point in June, we went back and bought some more plants and we put in a spice bush here. Oh no, this was before June. I think it was probably April or so. And the spice bush immediately died within a month. I think the soil here is not great. And so when we went back in June and bought some more plants, I bought this Ceanothus Ray Hartman, which will be eaten heavily. But if we can get it tall enough, then it might actually have a chance to survive. So that's why this one has a big cage on it. And this one I do have hopes for still. I'm still holding out hopes for that one. So this is a Brandigee sage. And this is, I believe, a native to an island that I can't remember right now. But yeah, so definitely showing some signs of drought stress. So we are going to water tonight. So that brings us to July and August. So this was the heat wave casualties. We lost the dwarf white sage. Both of the Dara's choice sages died. We lost one Salvia Gracias. Also, this one's not doing great, but it is still alive. We lost a Hummingbird Sage and the Twin Peaks Coyote Brush. So this was really when all of these plants were really heavily tested by that first major summer heat, followed by a couple episodes where there was some significant overwatering as well. And those are the ones that didn't make it. So I planted a few different hummingbirds, sages here. Planted 6 of them, 3 on this side, 3 on that side. The one that was planted over there on the end didn't make it. It got overwatered early in the season and kicked the bucket. I thought it was going to come back, but then the heat really kicked in while it was trying to reestablish, and it didn't make it. But these 5 are doing really good, really happy with those. And then over here, we originally had a coyote brush, which the deer didn't eat. Nobody ate it, actually. And I thought it would be a great plant for this area. Las Politas Nursery talked about how aggressive it was and how ugly it was. And I thought, that's great. I could use an aggressive, ugly plant. If the deer don't eat it, then I'll have a green thing in my garden, and that would be awesome. But though that wasn't in the cards, it died. I think it got overwatered, or possibly the heat is just too much for it in this area. It could be. I'm not sure. So here's a closer look at. You can tell this white sage really did well this year. It got huge. It sent up these giant flower stalks, which were like 6 feet high, and then it just died. The whole thing all at once died, and I can't explain it. I don't know. There's this ground squirrel at the base. It does smell amazing. Absolutely incredible. White sage, especially when it's dried. That's of course the stuff that they sell in the New Age shops. This Dara's Choice sage died, and then later in the season, this Dara's Choice sage died. And I don't know what the cause for that was. I did have one other Dara's Choice that was way over there that I planted in 2022. That one also died. So I don't know if maybe the Dara's Choice is just not as adapted to the heat that we get in this area, but it's not the happiest here. So next year I'll probably try some Bee's Bliss or some Gracias. These are the Gracias sages. I planted 4 of them, and 3 of them made it. There's one that was right there that I took out, which died. And this one is struggling in a similar fashion. So my leading theory about why the Salvia Gracias and possibly the white sage and the Dara's Choice died, it could be that this area here, if you see this mud patch, water wells up from the ground here. It's almost like there's a natural place where the water runs down the hill and almost emerges here. So it's possible that there's a natural seep of sorts that goes down this area, and that might explain why there's a row of dead and struggling sages that don't really like a lot of water. They don't want their feet to be wet all the time. And it's also supported by the fact that directly behind that white sage, there's a monkeyflower. And monkeyflowers are natural riparian plants. They like seeps and really wet spots, and that monkeyflower was planted in June, and I fully expected it to die, and it didn't. So I might maybe plant like a band of plants in this general area that like it a little moister, and see how that goes next year. So we shall see. There is one more item that I want to place on this diagram, which is right here and I will let Outdoor Ed explain who that is. There is a volunteer here that I would like to acknowledge. This is a blue oak, I believe. Yeah, that's definitely a blue oak. That just popped up here from an acorn that this grove of trees clearly deposited, and I'm just gonna let it go. I know I probably don't want a blue oak here, but it'll be several years before it gets big enough to dominate the area. And I will give up this garden for a blue oak because they are very important to the ecosystem of the central Sierra Nevada foothills, and they don't regenerate very quickly. And there's a lot of theories about why that is. Out in the hillsides, you have mature trees and you have saplings, or rather seedlings, I think you call them, or maybe they do call them saplings, but you don't have mid-sized trees. It's like they're just not making it to adulthood, and they don't know if it's because of drought or animal grazing or increasing temperatures from global warming, or diseases that are being introduced to the ecosystem from invasive species. There's just, or the competing grasses. That's probably a major part of it. Is all this grass is non-native. It was introduced by European settlers as animal forage, and it's taken over the California hillsides. And so it's possible that it's just choking out all of the young oaks before they can get established. But regardless of what it is, if I can get one to live in my garden, all the better. It is the next day, and I did water last night, so you can see my Brandagie sage is looking a lot better, which is great. And this is a good spot for me to say a major thank you as I try to find a way to wrap up this really, really long video. Major thank you to my mentor, Leslie, who operates a website called nativeplants.livehere.com, which is all about gardening in this particular area of California. Unfortunately, she has moved away, and I hope in some small way continuing this video series for the 3 or 4 people who ever see it who are trying to plant a native plant garden in the central Sierra Nevada foothills. Hopefully it's a way to kind of carry on that legacy. She's incredible. She put together this list of plants that are tried and true for this area, which, as you can tell from my videos, is a challenging area to plant in because you have drought, you have deer, you have competing invasive plants, you have ground squirrels and gophers, and it's hard to find anything that will stay green here, which is not, kind of from Australia or, Chile. So trying to really get a native plant garden going here is a labor of love, and it's a lot easier for me because of the work that she did. A lot of these plants, really all of the plants that haven't been eaten for the most part, are ones that she really did a lot of the preliminary research on, a lot of the elbow grease of trying out different species and seeing what would work. So just a huge thank you to Leslie, and a lot of what I say, at least all of the accurate parts of what I say, are pretty much echoes of what she has taught me. And I'm continuing to learn. And that's the point of this video series. It really helps me kind of stay grounded, to see where I came from. I had, even before I started this video, forgotten about sort of some of the sequences of events that happened over the course of this year, of this summer, of this season. And so it's helped me to kind of see how things played out, to learn a little bit about next year. So we lost about 15 plants this year. There was sort of the streak of death that came down here from the black sage, the starlight, the Winifred Gilman, the white sage, the Dara's choice, and the Gracias sages. We lost the Dara's choice there as well. And then, the coyote brush, which we lost over here. We lost a spice bush. We lost an eriogonum in that general vicinity. I don't know if the California Buckeye is alive or not. We had some major issues with Bermuda grass, which choked out and murdered my 6th hummingbird sage in that area. So lots of learning this year, but I will note this, and that is that the garden that I planted in 2021 and the garden that I planted in 2022, which are actually way over there on the other side of that hill, those ones lost a lot of plants in their first year too. But this year I didn't lose any plants over there, and I wasn't as attentive to them as I was to this garden. So this is kind of par for the course. The first year, everything's going in and you're kind of testing the waters on some things and figuring out what works and what doesn't. And if they establish and they stick, they have a much better chance of making it through the next couple seasons. The challenge for next year is going to be figuring out how to really take it to the next level in terms of how it flows, how it looks, how we prune or don't prune, and also there's some more plantings that need to be done. We've got to replace several things that didn't make it. I'm going to be working on this stream area here, which is going to have river rock go in on top of some weed barrier. And I'm going to try to recreate this band of tarweed next to the creek. I'm going to come out here and try to collect some of the seeds from this tarweed and see if I can replant it, because what an incredible gift that the tarweed was this year. When everything else kind of went to sleep and took a nap, the tarweed was in full bloom and just amazing looking for the entire end of the season. Right up until today, there's still some blossoms there. We're also going to be doing a lot more thinking about this area next year. How do we landscape in the shade in a way that makes sense? It's full of plants that are not on Leslie's list right now. The Snowberry, the Coffeeberry, the Radiant Manzanita, all of those things are super tasty and delicious for deer. I kind of want to try some ribes, some sort of a blackberry or a Sierra gooseberry next year as well. Those are delicious for deer, but they do get big enough to where if you cage them, you can keep the deer from getting them for a few years until they get tall enough. So I might try some of those. But yeah, so I hope that you enjoyed this video, kind of showing you how I planned out the whole thing, and maybe I'll kind of continue to update that diagram so that you can kind of see how this garden continues to evolve, and hopefully one or two of you will find it useful when you set about doing a California native garden and you Google that and you find a bunch of entries about how to do it in Los Angeles in backyards that are enclosed behind homes, or in San Francisco, and then you realize you come out here and you plant some of the stuff that they planted and it just immediately gets consumed by deer, or it's totally desiccated because they're telling you, hey, it only needs water every now and then. Well, maybe when there's like fog in the San Francisco Bay Area, maybe that's true, but here in the Central Sierra Nevada foothills, especially when it's blisteringly hot and there's no moisture in the air or the soil whatsoever, and you live on top of a granite shelf with, 8 inches of soil, that guidance just doesn't work very well. Maybe you'll find this helpful. I know I would have. So with that, I will sign off, and thanks for joining me on this little long-winded adventure.